Step into the Incense and Whiskey sanctuary with mindfulness enthusiasts and verified whiskey lovers, Mecca and Ashley, as they discuss all the random topics they love, from mindfulness to memes. This is Ashley.
And this is Mecca.
Welcome to the Incense and Whiskey sanctuary.
Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Mecca.
How's your Friday?
It's good. I mean, TGIF, I'm happy that it's Friday. We made it through another week. How was your Friday?
It's good. It's very busy, actually. It's a busy day because apparently the world is opening back up. And so people all want a thing, right? Everyone wants something. They want to call. Can we schedule a meeting? Can we talk about this? So work is in full effect and people are in full effect. And I don't know if I'm ready for it.
Would you say you're feeling vulnerable right now? And let me give you the definition. So the definition of vulnerability is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally.
Ooh, I feel a little bit of vulnerability then. Not that I feel like I'm gonna be attacked.
You're gonna be like somebody gonna run up on you or anything. But.
Yeah, I don't feel like that. I just feel like there is a lot of movement going on in these streets because people are excited to be out. When we started this, we were in the middle of quarantine.
Right, like quarantine had really just set in, and right when we started this Incense and Whiskey journey. And now we're at a place where people are trying to be outside, and we've had these like built-in boundaries, right?
Yes.
So fit like actual physical boundaries, right? Keeping your own space and distance, but then also like energetic boundaries, because it's not like you had to overextend yourself or no one was expecting it, right? For you to be, energetically engaged with them. Everyone was just trying to take care of themselves the best way they could during the pandemic. And now, to varying degrees, people are trying to be like out on the street. So we all feel a little vulnerable right now.
That's a good point. We all are feeling vulnerable right now. And it's funny because, like, as we think about like vulnerability, like think about like how it shows up for us, just day to day, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about specifically, people out here because the world is opening up and there's all the things that we were once protected from, the cars, the noise, all of that. And so I would be interested in like, how us being vulnerable, how is that like a benefit, like in relationships? How is that a benefit or a con, just like in general in life, right?
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring it up in that way. I know Brene Brown does a lot of research around this work. She has a few books and, a Netflix special where she talks about, this is like the crux of her research. Mm-hmm. And she recently published a book where in partnership with someone else, it was a series of essays by, I believe, specifically Black women, or it may be different individuals from the Black community, to talk about how being vulnerable and showing up as vulnerable is different for that group versus other demographics. Regardless, we get back to the subject. I think that vulnerability can show up in a lot of ways, and it depends on our comfort with and exposure to emotional, social boundaries. That's what I think. And I have some early memories of the first time that I had this like in-depth experience with or acute feeling of vulnerability and being amazingly afraid of what that meant for myself and my own like emotional safety. Nothing like overly dramatic, but I feel like a lot of people can relate to this. I went through like this my first really big heartbreak in a relationship, a long-term relationship. in graduate school, and I felt like exposed in a way that I've
Mm-hmm.
never been before, and felt like I had been completely 100% like myself open with this person, and that person rejected who
Mm-hmm.
I was, and left me high and dry. And I remember feeling like so vulnerable, and I acted out in ways that were not like me. I was drinking
Mm.
a lot. I was like day drinking, like showing up at my little part-time job and them being like, "Are you
Girl, what you on?
are you hungover right now? We might need to cancel your shit." It was bad. Um, I had friends who would like have to take me out to eat to make sure I was eating.
Mm.
Like it was really bad. I
Yeah.
was calling this person and like leaving the most like reckless, random voicemails to the point where one of my friends was like, we need you to stop this. Like, do I need to take this?"
Let's reel this in.
And I've never been like that before, never been like that since either. But that was the first time feeling really vulnerable, feeling like some kind of emotional safety and comfort that I had in that relationship was taken away from me. And then over time, I really started to understand the strength in vulnerability. I don't know. Is that something that you thought about? Like,
No, what you're saying makes so much sense because it's almost like, yeah, when we show up as our true selves and we've allowed a person or a situation or whatever see us, because we all have these masks on. Before masks were mandatory, we always had some type of mask on,
yeah,
before a person meets you. So when you take the mask off and you're being vulnerable, or you're just kind of like letting that person see you for exactly who you are, um it does become heartbreaking when it's not received in the way that you were putting it out, right?
yeah, or like reciprocated or cut off without like understanding or clarity, right?
Right. And I mean, that kind of goes with a lot of things. We talked about this before, about like dating, and how there has to be a part of you that's vulnerable to actually be able to receive all the benefits of dating. But the scary part of it is, because you're being vulnerable, or because you're like, showing up as your true self,
Yeah,
and maybe it's not like some reciprocity between you and that other person, then you feel like you've put yourself out there and you haven't. But you have to go through that part that I'm just talking about, that whole vulnerability part, to even experience something good within a relationship. Because if you're always like closed off, and
um,
you have this mask on, that person may never know who you are, and you may never experience like that,
yeah, and
you
that's
know situation. But it's hard. It's like so even think about it, even in work, right? So maybe you are on this project, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, everybody come up with an idea, and maybe you typically don't. But this day at the staff meeting, you've said, hey, this is what I think we should do, X, Y, and Z. You kind of put your heart and soul into whatever proposal that you're bringing out. And for you, or anyone, that's like, I've showed you a piece of me. I've
yeah,
showed you something I've worked on, right? Does that make
mhm,
sense what I'm saying?
yeah,
And if it's received well, then it feels really good. If it's not received, and receiving well and not well is, it's left up in the air to how you take that. But if it's not received in a way that you were expecting, then that's the one key part of the lashing out, or feeling like less than, that can happen,
yeah,
unfortunately.
for sure. Something that came to mind when you were walking us through like the work instance is also, I think, like a defense mechanism around vulnerability could be perfectionism, for example.
Professionalism.
Perfectionism as a
Oh,
defense
yes.
of vulnerability. Like I have found myself in situations where I don't want my mistakes or shortcomings or misunderstandings to be public. Like I didn't want to feel vulnerable in that way. I didn't want to feel embarrassed that I overlooked something or this or
Mm-hmm.
that. And so I would work myself up into this state of perfectionism
Mm-hmm.
as like a defense mechanism against being vulnerable. Like
Yeah. Right.
why
That
is it
defense
not
mechanism.
okay to be vulnerable? Like where do we get that from?
I don't know. I feel like we've become a very sensitive, very sensitive society, especially where it used to just kind of be like, you put yourself out there and you take it or you leave it. That's the carefree, quote unquote, carefree attitude that one would have. But everyone has some sense of like defense mechanism that they use, and being vulnerable just around anyone, especially if it's like, there's no history or whatever between you two, is jarring. It can be a little jarring.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I was reading that there's like 4 types of there's a few different types. So there's physical, economic, and social vulnerability. Right? I mean, there's all kind, but specifically on that, as we think about it, it's one of those things that like physical vulnerability is just like that physical in a state of like yourself, your person, right?
So like, for example, as a person, if you're, more petite, someone could see you as vulnerable.
Exactly.
Something. Okay.
And then or if you're tall, someone automatically thinks what you are a model or you play a sport, or there's these physical qualities about people that people already kind of have a preconceived notion about. Mm-hmm. And then like economic vulnerability, what do you think that would be?
I mean, economic vulnerability to me would be like someone that is not in a position where they have financial stability and mm-hmm. economically vulnerable. So like changing costs of daily essentials are increasing with inflation or whatever. Someone that doesn't have continuity or financial stability in their paychecks is economically vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Likely won't be able to pay for, necessary goods and services if their income is not consistent. And I think, and then the last one you said is social vulnerability, is that correct?
Yeah, social vulnerability. And then there's one called like attitudinal, and I'm probably saying this wrong, but it's like attitudinal vulnerability as well. I feel like those kind of go hand in hand, but I could be wrong.
That's interesting because I feel like if you have one and they could be so closely correlated that you could be also, like you could have another, right? So your social and economic vulnerability be very closely connected, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever thought about it like that. And I feel like as we were talking about, it kind of came up when we were talking about my dating life and dating in general, how one has to do a thing to experience this on the other side.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's like that physics concept, like for every action there has to be equal and
exactly.
Like you have to do something in order to see some kind of response.
Exactly. Yeah. So
I think that's the vulnerability, right? Like the vulnerability is taking the step of doing the initiating action.
Exactly. You got it. And I feel like that word has been coming up so much lately. I would say with myself, and even thinking about how it works. So even saying that whole thing about the economic vulnerability, we saw that a lot over the last 12 months. A lot of things, a lot of societies and people's living and how they make their income were threatened and curtains were pulled. So we were able to see, the very vulnerable parts of this world, honestly, too.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you having this conversation with me.
I mean, it's something that I have thought about, so I really appreciate bringing up the topic. I think that initial shock to the system about being vulnerability really does or being vulnerable really does set you up for, how do I say this the best way I can think of it is you become desensitized over time. It's not as traumatic over time once you start really getting into the practice of being vulnerable. But that's not to say that you shouldn't be discerning, because there are times when, maybe it's not best to be vulnerable for whatever reason. To protect your own physical or emotional state. So you really have to be discerning and learn when is the right time for you to exercise that.
You're right, because it's not always, it doesn't lend itself to every situation. That's a good point, Ashley.
Yeah. I mean, I know I have been vulnerable in conversations with colleagues, particularly around last summer with, the murder of George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my colleagues, like, this is really how I'm coming to work today. This is really how I'm feeling. I'm not able to process in real time right now, because this, of this, like, the environment and what's happening.
Right.
And I've had colleagues that were really receptive to that vulnerability and, were empathetic in the best way they could and tried to find ways to provide me support during that time. And then I had some colleagues who, like, clearly didn't get it.
They were like, do you know him personally? Like, why are you upset? You didn't know him.
And we're definitely, like, struggling to meet me where I was. And then I regretted being vulnerable.
Yes, that's right there is that key of, like, when it can go all the way wrong, because I've shared something, and then all of a sudden it's not accepted and maybe it's questioned or whatever it is.
Or someone, like, misinterprets it or
misinterprets. Yeah.
The biggest thing is someone taking advantage of
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
If you share something like, this makes me really uncomfortable, or, like, whatever, not even in the context of that, but just, like, in general life, to see someone take that knowledge about you and use it against you or in a way that negatively impacts you, that could be, like, a real, a scary thing and prevent you from feeling comfortable being vulnerable. Sure.
That is absolutely true.
But I think it's important to think about, I think if we can anchor ourselves, so what do you think about this, Mecca? I think if we can anchor ourselves in maintaining connection with our inner selves, right, and our truth,
mm-hmm.
and maintaining that in every situation, then we will be able to identify. We'll be able to have the strength to remain vulnerable in the appropriate situation.
Right. I agree. I agree. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, it kind of goes back to just really being your truest self and letting your higher self kind of rule.
Yeah.
And dictate and drive the wheel. And then your intuition just gets stronger and stronger, and you know when and where.
Yeah.
And with who.
Right. And that with the with who part is important. I think a way that we can learn how to exercise that and within our comfort zone, exercise vulnerability within our comfort zone, is really being able to identify those individuals who can be vulnerable.
Catch us next time on Incense and Whiskey.
In the meantime, take a breath, have a sip,